They say humiliation fades with time. But what if the world carved your shame into your soul so deeply that every breath reminded you of it? That was the day my life changed, not because I failed, but because they wanted me to believe I was nothing. I can still hear the echo of their laughter. I can still see their eyes judging every piece of me, as if I didn't deserve to stand where they stood. And the worst part? I believed them, for a while. This isn't just a story about pain. It's a story about rising from ashes they thought would bury me forever. A story about truth, betrayal, and one final chance to turn humiliation into power. Because when the truth finally came out, it didn't just change my life. It shattered theirs. Let me take you back to the night it all began. The lights were blinding, the room was full of perfect smiles and sharper whispers. I had walked in with hope clutched tightly to my chest. Only to be stripped of it, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but raw, burning humiliation. But fate has a way of twisting the knife before handing you the blade. And that night was only the first cut. Speech balloon: what would you have done if the entire world turned its back on you that night? Would you fight back, or walk away in silence? Tell me in the comments below. I still remember the way their laughter cut through the grand hall like a blade. Crystal chandeliers overhead cast cold light on polished marble floors, but nothing felt colder than the whispers that trailed behind me as I stepped into my own wedding. In that single breath, I went from bride-to-be to public spectacle, stripped of dignity before everyone I once trusted. The moment I saw her, standing at the altar in my dress, flawless and unashamed, time stopped. My chest tightened, my fingertips trembled, and the applause that greeted her was the most thunderous condemnation I'd ever heard. It wasn't just that my fiancé had betrayed me. It was every secret glance I'd ignored, every uneasy smile I'd dismissed, all converging into a perfect storm of humiliation. I felt the heat of a dozen pairs of eyes burning into my back as I was ushered aside by cold, indifferent hands. My mother's gasp, my father's reddening face, they saw it all. The woman I loved more than life itself had traded our future for a more convenient storyline. And I, clutching a bouquet I never threw, was left with nothing but shattered vows and a heart drenched in disbelief. But that night did more than break me, it awakened something deeper. In the weeks that followed, I replayed every moment, every subtle signal I'd missed. The cryptic text messages on my fiancé's phone, the hushed phone calls my future mother-in-law excused as family business, the way the wedding planner's eyes darted whenever I approached. Each memory was a sting, each revelation a fresh cut. Trust, once the foundation of every relationship, turned toxic, eroding any hope I held. Yet, within that despair lay a flicker of defiance. It began as a whisper in my mind, they want me gone. But I refused to disappear. I refused to let their betrayal define the rest of my life. The pain was raw, but it was also a catalyst. Pain has a way of sharpening your senses, of guiding you toward truths you'd rather avoid. Late one night, curled on the living room floor with scattered photo albums around me, I realized something. I wasn't merely a victim, I was a witness. Witness to their cruelty, to their conspiracies, and most importantly, to my own resilience. My tears dried, replaced by a steady resolve. If they believed that burying me in shame would silence me, they had another thing coming. That was the turning point. The moment I decided I would hunt for answers, piece together the fragments of a story that had been stolen from me. I would expose every lie, confront every conspirator, and claim back the life that was rightfully mine. And so, in the coming chapters, you'll see how a broken heart became the source of unbreakable strength. You'll witness moments of quiet determination. Like the hour I spent retracing every step of our engagement, searching for the first thread of deception. You'll feel the sting of betrayal anew as I uncover secrets they thought were buried forever. And you'll understand, as I did, that sometimes the greatest victories spring from our darkest hours. But first, let me take you back to that fateful morning, before the dress was switched, before the crowd's roar, before my world imploded. It all began with an invitation I never should have accepted. For days after that blinding humiliation, I lived in a haze of shame and disbelief. I avoid mirrors, fearing the reflection would still hold a stranger's face, someone broken and naked in front of the world. Every morning felt like wading through quicksand, each breath heavier than the last. My phone stayed silent, my invitations unanswered, and even my closest friends tiptoe around me, uncertain whether to ask, "Are you okay?" or to pretend nothing had happened. Then, one rainy Tuesday evening, I found myself alone in a small neighborhood cafe, drawn there by the promise of anonymity and the comforting aroma of fresh espresso. I sat in a corner booth, rain pattering against the window, and let the steam from my cup fog my glasses. The world outside blurred into streaks of neon and dripping asphalt. Defeat curled in my chest like a living thing. I closed my eyes, summoned every ounce of courage to face the day's pain once more. That's when I heard it, a soft gasp and the choking rasp of someone in distress. Across the cafe, a well-dressed man in his early 40s was struggling, his tea forgotten, his face turning a drastic shade of red. Without thinking, I bolted from my seat and crossed the polished floor, heart pounding as loudly as any alarm. "Kiss of life," I murmured, kneeling beside him. He coughed violently, then gasped a final breath and looked at me, eyes wide, grateful, vulnerable. In that moment, my own grief stilled. I realized the power in my hands, the strength in my quickness to act. As his color returned, he gripped my arm. "Thank you," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. "You saved me." It should have been a simple exchange. Yet when I looked into his eyes, I saw something profound, recognition, as if he understood wounds deeper than this evening's scare. He introduced himself as Marcus Kane, an investigative journalist known for exposing corporate scandals. My pulse spiked, exposure was the last thing I craved. My mind screamed, "Stay away, he'll use your story, you're not ready." But Marcus didn't ask for details. Instead, he slid a slim card across the table. "I've been following a story, about betrayal, power, and lies. You might have answers I need." His gaze held mine, steady and earnest. Every instinct urged me to close the booth door behind me and vanish into the night. But some spark in his sincerity, and perhaps in myself, made me hesitate. I thought of the avalanche of deceit, my fiancé's cryptic messages, my future mother-in-law's late-night calls, the sudden hush in every room once my dress was switched. I thought of the journal entries I'd scribbled in sleepless nights, piecing together fragments of truth. Would any of it matter if locked behind my door? Was I doomed to fade into that memory of a bride abandoned at the altar? A tremor ran through me. Then, I straightened in the chair, meeting Marcus's expectant look. "I'll help," I said, voice low but firm. "Not for vengeance," I reminded myself. "For justice." In that word, justice, I felt the first flush of purpose since that catastrophic day. Marcus's expression flickered into a thin smile. "Good. Meet me tomorrow morning at the city archives. We start with the guest list and invitations." He stood, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder, an unspoken promise that I wouldn't be alone in this. As he walked away, I realized I was holding the card too tightly, sweat mingling with leftover tears on my palm. When I finally sipped my cold espresso, it tasted bitter but invigorating. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets gleaming under street lamps. I felt a shift inside, a seed of resolve taking root. I was no longer just the woman they humiliated. I was a witness. And soon, I would be the one to expose the truth. The morning I walked into the city archives, the weight of every whisper and judgmental stare pressed against my ribs. Marcus led me through endless rows of dusty ledgers and brittle guest books, evidence of invitations sent and forgotten promises broken. My heart thundered as I pried open the first volume, names scrawled in elegant cursive, each entry a lifeline back to the day I was cast aside. But before I could spot the telltale annotation that would name the co-conspirators, the archivist's stern voice cut through the silence. "This section is restricted," he said, arms crossed. His gaze flicked to Marcus's press badge. "You can't just waltz in here demanding files." In that moment, I felt the old panic rising. They won't let me see the truth. I swallowed hard, recalling the sting of that altar, the smirk on my ex-fiancé's face as he embraced my imposter. The archivist's frown deepened as I pressed the card Marcus had given me against his desk. "I have legal clearance," I whispered, voice quavering. "This is essential for an ongoing investigation." His eyes softened, for a second. Then he shook his head. "Procedures exist for a reason." He summoned security with a curt nod. Heightened alarms echoed in my mind: failure, shame, defeat. My hands clenched, nails biting into my palms. This is exactly what they want. Before I could react, Marcus placed a steadying hand on my shoulder. "Give me 10 minutes, he murmured. He stepped aside to debate terms with the archivist, leaving me alone in the cramped room. My breath hitched. Outside, the world had already begun to turn against me again. Arriving at my phone, I discovered an explosion of notifications, tabloid headlines speculating on my public meltdown, fake screenshots of text messages. My friends were asking if I'd lost my mind. Strangers labeled me attention seeker and drama queen. Spike after spike of betrayal drenched me in familiar agony. My resolve wavered. Maybe they're right. Maybe I don't deserve justice. I closed my eyes and inhaled, searching for that ember of defiance I'd felt when Marcus first approached me. The memory flickered, the moment I pulled him from the brink of collapse, my act of kindness a testament to who I truly was. I opened my eyes, pinpointed the archivist watching me through the glass. Without a word, I stepped forward and laid my hands flat on the counter. "I will not be silenced," I said, voice low but unwavering. The archivist's stiff posture softened, recognition, perhaps, of a stronger truth than his regulations. He handed me the volume. Heart pounding, I flipped to the page where an asterisk marked the altered invitation list, proof of their deceit, and the names behind it. As I tucked the ledger into my bag, I felt a surge of far more than relief. I felt power. And with that evidence in hand, the next step was clear: would confront them not just in private, but in the very light they had used to shame me. The revealing storm was about to break, one they would never see coming. That evening, back in the dim glow of my apartment, I laid the archivist's ledger across the kitchen table. The names stared up at me like enemies in a lineup. My former fiancé's signature, my future mother-in-law's in elegant script, and worst of all, my wedding planner's name scrawled with a casual flourish. Each pen stroke was proof of their betrayal, a meticulous conspiracy to erase me. My pulse hammered as I traced the connections, feeling both fury and a strange relief at finally holding concrete evidence. I sank onto the chair, the ledger heavy in my lap, and closed my eyes. Memories flooded back. The whispered phone calls my fiancé pretended were last-minute work, the cold tension whenever I mentioned wedding details, the planner's forced smiles. I had been so blinded by excitement that I missed every warning sign. Shame threatened to swamp me, but I forced it down. This shame no longer belonged to me, it was their legacy, and I would return it to them tenfold. Pulling my phone from my pocket, I opened a new note and began to type a list of objectives. Secure legal representation, prepare a public statement, gather corroborating evidence, emails, text logs, photographs, and line up allies willing to testify. My fingers flew over the screen, fueled by a determination I hadn't felt since before the betrayal. Each bullet point was a step toward reclaiming my life. Next came the toughest decision: timing. I knew that exposing them too soon, before I had airtight proof and a platform to reach a wide audience, would risk another humiliating setback. But waiting too long would let them bury their tracks once more. I pictured the boardroom where my future mother-in-law held court, the socialites who whispered in her shadow, the online trolls she'd hired to smear me. They thrived in half-truths and delay. I needed a moment powerful enough to shatter their narrative entirely. That moment arrived when I realized the company's annual gala was only 2 weeks away, a lavish event teeming with press, investors, and influencers. It was their stage to celebrate triumph, but it would become mine to dismantle their carefully crafted image. I imagined the crescendo. As the host introduced my ex-fiancée and her new bride in my place, I'd stand in a spotlight they never saw coming, armed with irrefutable proof and a voice unafraid to speak. In the days that followed, I transformed into a strategist. I hired a skilled attorney to draft a cease and desist that would freeze the gala's guest list, forcing them to confront the ledger publicly if they wanted to proceed. I reached out to the wedding planner's assistant, a sympathetic young woman who'd witnessed frantic phone calls and secret meetings, and secured her sworn statement. I assembled every text message where my fiancé's excitement suddenly shifted, where my mother-in-law's tone turned icy. Each night, I reviewed these artifacts under the harsh glare of my desk lamp, steeling my nerves. With every piece of evidence, my fear receded, replaced by a fierce anticipation. I was no longer the helpless bride cast aside, I was the orchestrator of their undoing. Soon, under the glittering chandeliers of that gala, they would watch their empire of lies crumple. The night of the gala arrived like a storm cloaked in silk and champagne, an event they expected to solidify their power and erase any memory of me. I slipped through the grand entrance under a simple alias, heart pounding as valet drivers in tuxedos whispered my name to each other. Inside, the cavernous ballroom gleamed with crystal chandeliers and mirrors reflecting 100 perfect smiles. My ex-fiancée stood on the dais beside my former dress, the very gown she had stolen. While guests applauded as though nothing was amiss. But beneath my calm exterior, a wildfire of resolve roared. Moments before the official program began, my attorney discreetly handed me a sealed envelope containing the gala's revised guest list injunction. I could feel the weight of every eye in the room swim toward me, suspicion flickering like candlelight. I rose, buttoned my simple black dress, and walked toward the dais with the slow confidence of someone who has nothing left to lose. The orchestra faltered, and laughter died as my voice, steady and clear, cut through the hushed crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, before we proceed, I have an announcement. Gasps rippled through the audience like shockwaves. My ex-fiancée's eyes widened, my future mother-in-law's lips pressed into a thin line. I lifted the ledger, the very proof of their deceit, high enough for everyone to see. This guest list, I said, voice firm but trembling with emotion, contains forged signatures and manipulated entries orchestrated by the people you all trust. I named names, the planner who swapped my gown, the mother-in-law who masterminded the scheme, even the social media stooges paid to spread lies. With each revelation, I saw faces blanch, whispered apologies freeze on trembling lips. I felt my own pulse calm, replaced by a fierce serenity as I recited text messages, phone logs, and sworn statements provided by the planner's assistant, each piece of evidence delivered like a judge's gavel. The lectern behind me felt distant, all that mattered was the truth unfolding. When I finished, silence settled over the ballroom as heavy as marble. Then came the tremulous clap of one brave investor, followed by another, building into a roar of support that drowned out the shock. My ex-fiancée stumbled backward, her composure crumbling, while her new bride's face flushed with humiliation. I closed the ledger and placed it on the dais. You tried to bury me under lies, I said softly, locking eyes with my ex-fiancée, but truth has deeper roots than your deceptions. Tears glistened on my cheeks, not of sorrow, but of release. I had reclaimed my voice. The gala's theme music, once celebratory, faltered into an uneasy prelude as guests turned to leave or embrace me in newfound respect. I felt hands on my shoulders, some tentative, some grateful, and realized I was no longer alone in this fight. In that moment, I recognized how far I'd come, from a bride rendered powerless to a woman wielding truth like a sword, cutting through the darkest of conspiracies. In the days that followed the gala, I navigated a world forever changed. Emails of apology and admiration flooded my inbox, journalists requested interviews, and the very community that had once whispered cruel judgments now championed my resilience. Yet amidst the accolades, my heart remained tender, scarred by the memory of betrayal. I spent quiet mornings on my balcony, sipping coffee as the sun painted the city gold, allowing myself to feel the full weight of both my pain and my triumph. Each dawn reminded me that healing is not a single moment, but a gentle unfolding. It is the courage to wake up again, to breathe through the ache, and to choose hope over bitterness. I began by reclaiming parts of my life I had abandoned, returning to my favorite small bakery for morning croissants, resuming evening walks through parks where laughter once felt forbidden to me. Little by little, I stitched back the fabric of my identity, not as the betrayed bride, but as a woman who refused to be defined by someone else's lies. I established a fund to support others who had faced public shame or deceit, turning my ordeal into a beacon of solidarity. When I met with those whose hands I now held, strangers who, like me, had felt powerless, I realized that shared vulnerability can become our greatest strength. My relationship with my family deepened as well. My mother and father, once silent witnesses to my suffering, now embraced me with gentle pride. They reminded me that love endures beyond the worst storms, and that forgiveness, of myself for missing the signs, and even of those who hurt me, was a gift I owed to my own heart. I learned that forgiving did not mean forgetting or condoning. Instead, it freed me from carrying their weight into my future. And as for love, I discovered it needed not grand gestures or perfect uniforms but simple, unwavering respect. A chance encounter with someone who saw my strength without fear rekindled my trust in connection. Together, we walked forward hand in hand, not to erase the past, but to build a present rooted in authenticity and mutual support. Now, as I stand here, no longer under crystal chandeliers but in the soft glow of my own inner light, I carry with me a truth stronger than any conspiracy. That our worth lies in our capacity to rise when we have been cast down. If my story teaches you anything, let it be this: betrayal can break you, but it can also awaken you. In the crucible of pain, we forge our truest selves. What part of this journey resonates with you the most? Share your thoughts and stories below. Let's continue this conversation of healing and strength together.